Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kerry with Multicopter Warehouse, trying to get everything started here. Make sure I got my boxes all up properly. Can you hear me? Do I sound okay? If you can put that in the question box there, I'd appreciate it. Let me know if I'm coming across okay. Good. Thanks, Kurt. Appreciate it. Couple more people joining here. So why are we here today? I get a lot of questions lately about the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual. Is it still relevant? Is it still worth buying? You know, what makes it, worth having compared to new products that are on the market? So today I wanted to kind of go over it and kind of dig into the features and really where is its place, and then we'll do a little comparison at the end and see how it compares to other products that are out there. So hopefully this will answer questions that I get on a daily basis, but also kind of give you a feel for where I think it fits in. And certainly if you have your own opinion on it as we go through this, please say something in the questions box. I'd love to hear what other people are saying. I know I recognize some of the names on here, and I know some of you guys have these. So if I say something that doesn't quite jive or that you'd like to embellish on, please speak up. I'd love to hear other people's opinions. So let's get into some of the specs a little bit, and we'll start with the visual camera. And yeah, I mean, it's a 4K camera. Nothing too exciting about it. It does Ultra 4K at 30 frames per second, or 2.7K, or regular 1080p. It has a 100 megabit bit rate, so the video quality on the visual camera is fine. It's definitely not a cinematic product because there's no ND filters or adjustable aperture. It is what it is. I mean, this thing's designed for specific use cases, and going out and doing videography is not one of them. So it's not going to have the features that we would want to see in a videography rig. This is really geared strictly at public safety. So, and some inspection work. There's certainly some inspection type jobs that it's well suited for. But like I said, it's not a cinematic product. If you're trying to do it for marketing videos, it's not really the right machine for it. On the thermal camera, it does have a 160 by 120 thermal imager. That the image sizes will come out to 640, 480, but they're scaled. They're because the sensor is only 160 by 120. The video recording, again, it's at 640, 360 at 8.7 frames per second, but it's just scaling up that 160 by 120 sensor. And again, it's got a 100 megabit bit rate, which is way overkill when you only have a 640 by 480 video stream. So the bit rate's really not that important on this particular one. Now that sensor on the thermal is really its Achilles heel. But we're going to talk about why it's okay in many situations and why it may not be okay for some things. Slides didn't change. There we go. The system itself is capable of about 31 miles an hour in GPS mode, or up to almost 45 miles an hour in sport mode. The wind resistance is good. They rated it between 18 and 23 miles per hour. I've certainly flown it in worse wind conditions than that. I'm not going to get super stable footage at that point, but it's going to be usable. 25 gig, I copied that off their website. That's not right. It's 24 gig. So strange on the internal storage. Maximum range 6 miles. I've never pushed one out 6 miles before. It's kind of ridiculous to be pushing a machine like that out. The batteries have built-in heaters, and for some of us, I know I see some of you that are here in Colorado and stuff. If we want to fly during the winter, those heated batteries can make a huge difference. If we're flying the regular Mavic 2 batteries and we're up in a pass at 12, 13,000 feet and it's freezing cold temperatures, we can lose 30% of our flight time. These heated batteries really keep us from losing that much power in the cold and the altitude like that. They really, really help. If we're selling this to someone in Florida, I'm not going to recommend the Enterprise Fly More kit because you're just spending extra money on the heated batteries that you'll never need in the coldest conditions. Here in Colorado, I mean, if we're out flying and it's 0 degrees or 5 below, you want those heated batteries. Basically, they're good for any time it's below freezing. So typically below 30 degrees is when I'm really going to be happy that I have the heated batteries. And I use those same heated batteries in my Mavic 2 Pro because I do fly that all year round, and those heated batteries can really increase my flight time in those conditions. And then the Enterprise Dual does come with the 3 different accessories, the strobe, the loudspeaker, and the spotlight. And I'll touch more on those. And you have really good situational awareness with the ADS-B in, being able to see ADS-B transmitters from manned aircraft. So in seeing where other airplanes are, that's really handy. I think I got a screenshot of that later on as well. So I think that can be an important thing if you're flying near airports. Those of you who have been to my shop here, we are a block away from the busiest regional airport in the country. I mean, it's super busy, and being able to keep track of where the other airplanes are because they fly right overhead, that's important. Now, we never fly above 150 feet. The airplanes here are about 1,000 feet, but still, I want to know where they are just in case. Now, the downside of the Dual, I'm just going to start right off with the 2 things that it would be really nice if they were improved on this, and it's the low resolution thermal camera. When the standard, I should say, if I'm going to say standard, but the norm when it comes to a thermal camera is going to be 640 by 512, and that's going to provide great detail. You can be at a good distance and still see the details really good. And the 160 by 120 on the Enterprise Dual is a pretty darn small sensor. So in order to get good detail, you have to get closer. And even that, you're still limited by the size of the sensor. So to me, that is the biggest downside of the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual. I kind of was hoping that this week with DJI Airworks that they might announce at least a new camera or something, but they didn't. So, we may have to wait for maybe a Mavic 3 series. Who knows? And the visible camera is 12 megapixels. And again, while it's okay and it's pretty much industry standard, DJI is already moving to sensors like a 1/2-inch sensor on the Mavic Air 2, which it wouldn't have taken much to include this on here, or just a 20 megapixel sensor that just would give us better resolution, the ability in post-production to take an image and zoom into it and have more detail, I think would be great. But unfortunately, those are the 2 things that I think are really the downsides to the Enterprise Dual. On the plus side, the price point is really good. When we're talking about a aircraft system that comes with the case, the different accessories, the battery, the charger, all the stuff that comes with it, and buying the Enterprise Fly More kit, we're under $5,000. And that, I think, is huge for agencies across the country where you go over that $5,000 point, and now it becomes going to city council or the mayor or someone who has to approve that purchase because you went over that $5,000 mark. So DJI keeping that price below that $5,000 threshold, I thought was absolutely huge. So price point, probably one of the top things that I think is the benefit of the Enterprise Dual. The accessories, I think the accessories are really interesting. The strobe, if you're flying at night, the loudspeaker to be able to send messages. You can't hear, but you can send messages. I think it is fantastic for search and rescue and law enforcement operations. And the spotlight. And The spotlight's nice and bright, and it has a number of different uses that you can do with it for looking into a vehicle at night, or lighting up an area, or doing overwatch. You know, when there's a suspect has been taken down, just fly it over and just light up that area for the officers, for search and rescue. There's a number of really good applications for the spotlight. So I think the accessories, they did a really good job on. The 30-minute-ish flight time, you know, depending on your altitude and weather conditions, I think are really good. Everyone always wants more flight time, but on an aircraft this size, that flight time, I think, is really solid. And the ability to have isotherm or thermal alerts, I think, was a really big feature on here. That allows you to set a temperature range so that it kind of pops up and is more visible on the screen when you're trying to search for something. Some of the competing products out there they don't have that. And the on-screen temperature display, so you can look at something, you know, if you are looking at something that's showing a temperature, you can do a screenshot. Actually, I probably should have had something listed on the cons page that there's no radiometric JPEGs. So there's no post-processing of the thermal data. You can't take the images and put them into FLIR tools to run reports on them. So it's good for differential analysis, differential monitoring of something. So again, for search and rescue, that's really good. For solar panels, it's very effective because you can see which panel is working or not based on the temperature of it. You don't need to know what the temperature is. You just need to know that's hotter than that or that's cooler than that for some types of inspection work. Now, if you go and you're doing utility inspection and you're looking at a pole-mounted transformer, those things are hot. Great. That's all this tells you is, yep, it's hot. Now the question is, how hot is it? That becomes an issue. An engineer or technician looking at a string of images that just go, yeah, that's hot, that's hot, that's hot. It means nothing to them. They need to know how hot is it to determine whether that transformer is within proper spec or not. And that's where the Enterprise Dual does not do the job. It cannot tell you something is hotter than something else unless you're sitting there doing manual screenshots, which is kind of a pain. So I wish that was there, but it's not. So again, one of the downsides to it, but at least you have on-screen temperature display. Now, one of the big things that I really like about the Enterprise Dual and the Zenmuse XT2 as well is MSX. And this allows you to combine thermal and visible images to provide what appears to be a higher level of detail. So on the left here, you can see a thermal only image of the front of our building. You can't read the sign, you can't read the stickers on the door. There's, you know, very little information to go off of. And on the right, with the MSX on the middle position, you can read our sign, you can see the DJI logo, you can see our suite number. So practical application for this is if you're flying over a 18-wheeler that is in an accident, you need to see that label that's on the side of the trailer to know what type of material is in that trailer. Is it hazardous material? Is it milk? You know, what's in it? And a normal thermal camera, you won't be able to read that sign that's there. But with MSX, you can. So that's a big, big plus for the Enterprise Dual. And again, competitors out there don't really have that. So that's a biggie, I think, on here. And because of the lower resolution of the thermal camera, the MSX technology provides I'll say it, an apparent increase in detail and resolution, because you can clearly see the difference between these two images here. And one, it looks like a low quality thermal image. On the other hand, on the right side, it looks like a very high resolution thermal image. Even though it's still not, it's because you're seeing that visible image through the thermal that gives you that higher level of detail. So very interesting trick into making it more effective than it might have been because of this MSX. So one of the things I think really separates it from other products that are out there. You guys good so far? No questions, no comments. Man, I feel like I'm just talking to myself. I'll talk about the different options here. I mentioned them before: the spotlight, the loudspeaker, and the strobe. The strobe easily has a visible range of, whoa, what just happened? Hold on, wait, there we go. The strobe has a visible range of 3 statute miles, no problem. We've driven it down the road and been able to see it, so I've verified that in normal conditions the strobe is quite capable. The loudspeaker is actually better than I ever expected. You can put the aircraft out about 400 feet and not really hear the drone at all and still be able to hear the loudspeaker. So I've flown over people and played music and things, and they're looking around trying to figure out where it's coming from because they can't hear the drone. It's really handy for search and rescue. You can say, hey, we've got you spotted, don't move, stay right there, we know where you are, help is on the way. Do you need anything? Are you injured? Wave your arms if you're injured, put them straight out if you're okay, things like that. You can give instructions. You can really find ways of communicating with a one-way speaker system since you have visual coming back. So I think the loudspeaker has been really, really useful. And I think it was last week in Sacramento, California, they arrested somebody using a Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual with the loudspeaker. The suspect was under a bridge. They flew the drone over there. They communicated to him. They gave him instructions on coming back with his hands, behind his head, all that stuff. And they had a very peaceful surrender and arrest versus having to let the dogs loose, risk that huge liability if something happens and the guy gets bit hard or loses an eye, or all these things happen. I've heard many, many stories. So having that loudspeaker and actually executing arrests and surrenders with the drone and not putting an officer at risk, a dog at risk, or the suspect at risk, I think is phenomenal. And I love hearing stories like that. It just really validates all the technology. And the spotlight, again, being able to light up a scene at night is really cool. I'll show you a couple examples of that. So the loudspeaker, here we have my suspect getting arrested with the drone. We've heard numerous reports of contactless arrests and surrenders with the loudspeaker. Being able to give the messages to suspects from a safe distance obviously has many advantages, as well as being able to give messages to victims, search and rescue. Very good stuff on that side of things. Very happy with it and how it works. And it's quite clear. If you've never heard it before, it works really well. And the spotlight, well, someone messed up my slides here. Same text. Gosh darn it. Oops. But anyway, you can see the spotlight. We've heard of, the police officers flying right up to a vehicle, pointing the light inside the window to see whether it's clear, see if people have their hands on the steering wheel, make sure they're not reaching for something, giving that extra level of situational awareness when they're doing a night operation, being able to light up an area, light up a doorway, all kinds of different applications with the spotlight that we've seen. And it's surprisingly bright for a little spotlight on a little drone. So it works extremely well. And I wanted to go back and touch on that AirSense, the ADS-B detection system. So here you can see the map. You can see the small arrow is where the drone is, and you can see 3 different aircraft in the vicinity, and you'll actually get a list on the side telling you what flight it is and how far away it is. Very helpful to make those decisions of, is that plane coming at us and we may have an issue, or is it in a safe position so we can continue our operation. Now, last up, I do want to talk about the comparisons to kind of the newest major new products that are out there. The first being the Matrice 300 RTK with the H20T. Obviously we're looking at a cost increase of 10 times to go up to a Matrice 300, and it needs a bigger vehicle. A Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual, pretty much any vehicle at all, you can haul one of these things in. It's a tiny box. Matrice 300, you pretty much need an SUV to be hauling this thing around. I mean, it's a big box. It's expensive. Now, the flight times are fantastic. I mean, we're getting 40-ish minutes of flight times versus 30 minutes on an Enterprise Dual. So we're seeing really, really good flight times. That does take longer to deploy. You got to get it out, open the box, take it out, fold the arms out, pull the props out, put the camera on. I mean, there's a setup time. And all that time, the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual has already been in position and doing its job while you're still setting up a 300. Now, granted, the H20T does have a phenomenal camera on it, a 24 times zoom, the 640 by 512 thermal, and a wide angle camera, as well as a laser rangefinder. And really cool features like the pin drop, and the tracking feature is phenomenal. I mean, I tracked a vehicle for over 2 miles without the aircraft ever moving. So I was able to lock onto it almost a mile away, and it followed the vehicle until it was almost a mile away in the opposite direction. Just blows your mind, and it's doing that by zooming in to keep the vehicle in frame and at pretty much the same size on the screen, but it never has to move to do that. So there's really good features that are on the Matrice 300 and the H20T that, I mean, you just can't do on the tiny camera of the Enterprise Dual. So there's definitely a time and a place for the M300 versus the M2E, but you also have to look at the other side of it. Cost is a big factor. Not every agency can go and drop 30 grand, 35 grand, however many batteries they need. It adds up very, very fast. And the cost of 2 sets of batteries for the M300 is the cost of a Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual. So, I mean, yeah, pretty much, right in there. They're $700 a battery times 2, so $1,400 per set of batteries versus $3,500 for a Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual. The cost of an M300 skyrockets very, very quickly. And the last one I want to talk about is the Autel Evo 2 Dual. We are also an Autel Evo 2 dealer. The Evo 2 Dual has been selling really good, but 3 times the price. You're looking in the right around $10,000 to take home an Evo 2 Dual. What you get for that extra price is you do get more flight time, anywhere from, typically about 5 to 7 minutes of extra flight time. And it does have a 640 by 512 thermal camera. So when it comes to doing search and rescue missions, inspection work, that higher resolution thermal is really handy. I tell you a quick little story. 2 weeks ago, 5 goats went missing off a farm, and I decided, well, I'll go try and help. And the difference between using the Enterprise Dual and the Evo 2 Dual was massive. Being able to fly over, see the ground in a much higher level of detail, and actually use a digital zoom on, excuse me, the Evo 2 Dual has a digital zoom on the thermal. You can punch in, I believe it's up to 10 times, but even at 4 times, I was able to verify what I was seeing and be able to go, oh, that's a deer, not a goat. And with the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual, the only option was to fly closer. So I had to be lower to the ground, which meant I couldn't cover the same amount of area in the same amount of time. So I had to fly more batteries to cover the same area, and it has less flight time per battery. So the Evo 2 Dual, having that longer flight time and that higher resolution and the digital zoom was absolutely huge in trying to do that search and rescue mission. Now, granted, it was goats and not people, but it was a big, big, big difference. The video on the Evo 2 Dual can go up to 8K video at 120 megabits. It actually looks really good, but I prefer to shoot in 4K just because I don't need that super high res of video. The pictures are the same. They're both 12 megapixel stills. Like the Enterprise Dual, there's no temperature information being saved to the images. The big difference is on the Evo 2 Dual, there's no temperature reading at all. So not on the screen, not live, not real time. At no way can you see the temperature that you're looking at something. So where the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual can be used for certain types of inspection work by taking a screenshot of that temperature that's on the screen, the Evo 2 Dual cannot. It's only, is it hotter than that? So for in some types of inspection work, the Evo 2 Dual is not going to cut it. But for other applications, solar panels is a good one where you don't really need to know the temperature. You do need to know whether it's hotter than that. Search and rescue, law enforcement, those public safety applications, the Evo 2 Dual is a great product, but it's 3 times the price. So all of a sudden you're getting into that $10,000 mark, and it's much, much, much harder to get a budget like that approved than something that's going to be sub $5,000. Let me see what you got to say, JP. Does the Evo have something like MSX? No, it does not. So Autel has been extremely responsive in the last few months that we've been carrying the Evo 2 products, and pretty much every single firmware that has come out, which has been about every 2 to 3 weeks, has had at least one feature in it that I've requested. And I went over the list of things that I want in the Dual, and now whether they can do MSX or not, I'm not sure. I don't think it's a technical issue because this is a FLIR camera. So, and MSX is a FLIR technology. It's not a DJI technology, it's a FLIR technology. So I'm hoping that it's something that they can actually do. The interesting thing is the Matrice 300, the H20T, does not have MSX. And the H20T is not a FLIR camera. It is a DJI camera. So there is no component from FLIR in the H20T, which is why it does not have MSX. Now the current firmware that just came out allows you to do an overlay of sorts. It's not the same as MSX, but it's kind of better than nothing, but it's not quite, well, it's nowhere near the same. It's not as good as MSX. The Evo 2 Dual, when you're flying it, you have 3 different modes of 3 different views you can have. You can have the normal RGB camera view, you can have the thermal view, or you can have an overlay, and it will put the thermal on top of the daylight. Now, this doesn't allow you to mix it or have any transparency. You'll just see this bigger daylight view with the smaller thermal view right in the middle of it. So you can, the only difference is the field of view. But it does help when you're framing your shots and things to see that. But no, unfortunately, it does not have something equivalent to MSX, nor does it have isotherm or temperature alerts. These are all things that I have requested from Autel to see if they can add, and I've explained why. I've gone over the different reasons for it, the market segments, who needs it, all those types of things. So I am hopeful that Autel will add some of these features in the future. But as it sits today, August 26, 2020, those are not in there. So if they happen, I guess I'll have to do another webinar. But for now, nope, it's not there. So those are really the 2 out there that we see all the time. There's other products that are coming to market, the Paradanafi and Skydio is going to have one, but I didn't want to nitpick all the different ones. These are the two that I really know, the Autel and the DJI, because I sell them. So it's easy for me to make the comparisons. I've flown all of them. I've been out there and put them in real world environments to really see how they perform, and is that higher resolution on the Evo 2 really worthwhile over the lower resolution with MSX of the Enterprise Dual. And for pretty much all applications, the higher resolution is just going to win, because we think about that MSX. Let's kind of go back to that slide here. In order to see that logo on the window, or our logo up on the sign above, there has to be visible light for that visible camera to work. So if this is pitch black, middle of the night, that MSX view does not look really any different than the thermal view, because there was nothing to light those fixtures or light those details. So the MSX relies on some amount of light being there, and that's kind of its downside. So if you're doing a thermal mission in the middle of the night, MSX really isn't going to do you any good. It's not there. It doesn't have the visible image to mix into it. So it does go, both ways. There's the plus of it, where it adds that apparent resolution. The downside of it is it actually needs light to work. So hopefully this has been useful. I mean, this isn't one of my normal, 90-minute long webinars, but I've had these questions all the time lately, especially comparing the Autel to the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual, which I think is an extremely unfair comparison. I would rather compare the Autel to an M200 or an M300 because of that higher resolution camera. I don't really think it's fair to compare them to the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual, other than size. We're 3 times the price with a much higher resolution visible camera, a much higher resolution thermal camera. We've got more flight time. There's a lot of advantages to it that it's really not fair to compare the two, but everybody does, so I figured, hey, what the hell. So unless there's any other questions on here, we can go ahead and start wrapping things up. I really appreciate you guys taking your time to come on board and just spend your Wednesdays with me. Be sure and go to the website and check out the other upcoming webinars every Wednesday. You should have got an email this morning, unless you found this on Facebook or something. But later on today, or first thing in the morning, depending on how fast processing happens, you'll get an email that will have a link to all of the other webinars that we have coming up. A lot of stuff on mapping, which I think is really cool. There's some stuff for construction, which I think is really cool. So we've got some really neat webinars coming up. And again, thanks for joining, and I will catch you guys all later. Thank you very much.